Welcome to the Hessian Scrum episode 4. Joining me today is a man who's known mostly for his incredible ADHD brain and who can write a million albums. Welcome, Cullen Toner.
It's an honor to be part of this label, this podcast. A lot of really cool stuff happening. It's a privilege to be involved in such early stages. Very, very cool.
A lot of people on the or associated with the label don't really know who you are. Could you tell us some of the the more important bands you worked with, considering how many bands you worked with overall?
I guess the most important would be Abazagorath and Dawnbreaker. Abazagorath is the oldest and I guess the longest running as well black metal band from New Jersey. They were, I think, the first album on LG Records, which went on to be the second longest running American black metal label. Very, very popular in the Northeast of the United States and kind of random in other countries. A lot of the members went on to form even bigger bands like Disma. Bass player went on to Evoken. So there's a lot of history in that band, being started from the earlier mid-90s and still going on. So that's probably my most well-known in terms of record sales and metal media exposure. That would be the most well-known. I mean, we premiered songs in Vice magazine. We were in Decibel and Terrorizer, and all those fun blogs. Brooklyn Vegan was always reporting on our shows, ironically. My other most well-known band would be Dawnbreaker, which I've been doing since 2018. And that's more well-known within the Christian metal niche, which is the smallest of all musical niche. I might not even pronouncing that word correctly. It's a niche of a niche, basically. It's like the smallest music scene ever, but it's, I guess, one of the more well-known within that scene at this point.
You joined Abazagorath sometime in the late 2000s, after the whole USBM thing kind of fizzled out.
I actually joined in 2006 officially. I wouldn't say it fizzled out completely by then. I think it was probably on more of a downturn. The real renaissance of American... Well, there are different movements within the genre that you could argue were important or popular or whatever. The original wave of American black metal, I would say, was the whole like Profanatica, Demon Sea, everybody still had just recently came out of their death metal bands and they still had all their like really heavy tunings and everything was just slow and heavy and atonal as heck. Then you had that whole like suicide wave. You had that Moribund Explosion. You had Zathzer. You had Leviathan, and that wave of bands, which I think was even more popular than the initial wave. And then later you had all those like black metal derivatives, the Cascadians, and then eventually the hipsters of all those unfortunate California bands. So. When I joined, it was just after that whole peak of, in around 2004, 2005, when all those suicidal bands started coming around and Knock Museum started going on an upswing. And Krieg was going from the guy that played bass from Judas Iscariot to, one of the more important bands, I guess, in the United States. So... it was an interesting climate. It was right after all of the everyone started pulling the keyboards out of black metal bands. People thought that was the worst thing in the world, and people were gravitating either in a more melodic black metal direction or more, I guess, what you could call Norsecore. Stuff like Marduk or maybe even Dark Funeral, the real hyperblast all the time. Upwards of 220 beats per minute. Type stuff. It was an interesting time when I first joined. Unfortunately, it was several years before I did anything productive with them. Like I said earlier, they were all involved in other bands, and those other bands ended up taking away a lot of the attention, and they became more interested in the other bands they were doing. And some of the guys, like myself and the drummer, that were most committed to Abazagorath, kind of got left in the dust for a little while.
I remember that you were really young when you joined them, right? Most of the guys were about, what, 10, 15 years older than you for the most part?
Yeah, it's strange. I was 19 at the time, and that was it was a case where for a couple other my friends that were involved in Funebrarum and Abazagorath, that were my age. We all ended up playing in bands with all these older dudes because all the dudes our age just wanted to do metalcore basically, or hardcore or deathcore. So for us to start at the bottom would have been a lot harder than joining a more notable band, since there were such a slim amount of musicians really looking to do black metal in those days. It was about 3 years before you started seeing black metal bands springing up everywhere. I think around 2009 was when it sort of meshed with the hipster culture, and a lot more people started coming out to shows, and a lot more bands started coming around, and labels like Light Records started trying to corner off the American black metal market. So yeah, it was kind of weird, but it was also kind of awesome, like actually being in a 5-piece band where everybody loved black metal, and that was what they wanted, and that's what they wanted to be and what they wanted to do. It seemed like a pipe dream for a long time. But I learned a lot from those older guys too. My guitar playing really, really improved from being from those early sessions with Daryl. We had all kinds of goofy jam sessions. We'd be playing Funeral Doom, or have these weird like psychedelic effects, like not mixing kind of ish psychedelic black metal, and we none of this ever got recorded, but just from having another guitar player that the trade melodies with and test counter melodies with was a big help for my own songwriting, my own career. I learned a lot of valuable lessons from them. The most valuable being that if you're doing metal, none of your favorite bands are wealthy, or even like, even hitting like an average salary. Like I was shell shocked. I was like, wait a minute, those Hellhammers in Mayhem, he must be rich. He must live in a mansion.
Yeah.
It's these stupid delusions you have when you're a young teenager. That's probably the best lesson I think you can learn at that age is, hey, everybody's broke, basically, and that's why they're touring 10 months a year. But no, I learned a lot. I learned a lot of like the business end of things, and how you shouldn't really be viewing things as a competition with other bands. How it's more of a collaborative effort that you should support. They were really, really successful because I think they had this mentality of the metal brotherhood that, like, support these bands even if you don't like them, like if it's people who've got their hearts and their minds in the right place. And I just learned a lot of valuable lessons for them. So in one way, it was incredibly it was a real blessing, and I'm very grateful for that experience. It did seem strange at times, but it's something about metal that can just bring together people from across the generations, and it's not super weird.
So, after a time with those guys, you pretty much composed the full length, the Satanic Verses.
Yeah, and that was partially just because I was a freaking jerk. I wanted to be like John from Dissection or Hessian. Like I wanted to be this like this singer guitar player that could play solos and wrote most of the music. And originally it wasn't like that. When I started with them, we wrote all the songs together, me, the guitar player, and the bassist actually, and that was different, I think, from any other band I've been a part of, where even the bass player is writing riffs. The thing is, it didn't really go anywhere. And we had a whole album of material that we just never really used. And I I got really frustrated at one point. After several years, I ended up just like kind of almost giving up on the band, and I went away to college in Vermont, which is a good 6-7 hours from New Jersey, where we were all living at the time. And one day I got really frustrated because they're like, "Oh, dude, grab your axe. We're gonna get going again." And I was like, "Dude, we wrote a whole album and nobody did anything with it. And I was like, I think if it's really gonna work, I need to just write all the music. Let me prepare the music. Let me get a scratch. Let me get a drum machine and do some scratch drums, and let me get all this together and organized, and we have the music written, and then we all get together and we tweak our parts maybe a little bit here and there. But let's get organized about it. And if we're gonna do it, let's really do it. Let's not just go, just go off on these tangents for 2 years and do nothing with it. So that's how it started originally. The thing is, I had a lot of years in my career where I did nothing, just but play guitar for hours and write lots and lots and lots of music. I've always had really strong memory skills. I think it's a lot of time in front of video games like The Legend of Zelda. I credit or those Mario games or whatever that I credit to building up just really strong memory skills. So all these riffs that I wrote in 2004 and 2005, through 2007, 8, 9, I never really forgot them. I never really forgot the songs. So by the time we did our first EP, which I also wrote everything, I had this like arsenal of riffs and arsenal of songs, and I basically just was able to assemble like what were the 4 or 5 best songs that I wrote out of hours and hours and hours of material, which became the first EP that I did with them, which a lot of people I think liked even better than the full-length album. But yeah, the band was just really unstable with members, including me. Unfortunately, I was in and out at least 1 or 2 times before I left indefinitely. Guitar players and singers were coming in and out left and right. Bass player eventually moved on to do Evoken full time. The drummer was really the anchor, and he kind of realized that like the lesser the numbers were, the better. That maintaining a 5-piece was complicated. When we lost two of the 4 musicians that were on that EP, we decided to just keep it as a 3-piece. And between the other guitar player and I, we were able to cover all the bass, all the guitars. Between me and the drummer, we were able to do all the vocals. But yeah, that was sort of like the first of my many albums where I was kind of composing everything and performing almost all of the instruments. That ended up being a format that was most comfortable for me. I get really impatient writing songs with other musicians and waiting on them, and recording process is just all like it's unnecessarily long, long when you're doing it that way. So yeah, that's kind of how that came about. But I do credit the other guys. They were really good, and their contributions were really important. Warhead learned all the drums really quickly. He was really consistent with his recording. He kept time really good, didn't miss any hits. Brian was a real wild card. He did the clean vocals in the one song. He did some really great leads. So it was still a team effort, with me kind of at the helm in terms of the songwriting and the lyrics and stuff.
Yeah, and in many ways, that album kind of shows who you are as a musician.
Oh, yeah.
You carry John Nodvite, like even the way both of you guys play solos on that record. It's it's very eerily similar. I mean, not a rip-off, but you can tell there's a style. You can hear a lot of Ishan on that. Not the prog, not like the his solo stuff, But like even some of the the later albums, the stuff that came after Anthems, slightly,
Yeah,
Prometheus and I can't
yeah.
Equilibrium. Can hear
It's a
that.
very unpopular opinion, but Prometheus is actually probably my second favorite Emperor album after Nightside Eclipse. Just the aesthetic of it, just the it's hard to explain why it resonates so well with me. I didn't care at all about how progressive it was or how but the compositions were just so extraordinary. Like the way all the guitars played off each other. He made a really elegant use of the keyboards on that album. I thought I really loved that last album. So that's an excellent observation. Yeah,
It's
Dissection. If we were to rank my influences, those were the top two. But that album is so much of my personality. The biggest reason for that is up until that point, I always would kind of box in like what I was trying to do in terms of genre. So I would be like, okay, I'm going to start a suicidal black metal band, and I'm going to work within those parameters. Or I'm going to start a bestial war metal side project and work within those parameters. And I always had these like little tiny projects with like one or two demos in all these like very specialized sounds. And when I put that together, my whole development was like, look, instead of doing a million little projects with a million little sounds, why don't I mesh everything together onto one album and see if I could cover all the ground as far as black metal microgenres go, right? So I had riffs that were like black and roll. I had a whole song I would say was a black and roll piece. I had some Norse core. I had elements of Leviathan, I think, in some of the guitar tones that I used on the clean parts or the ambient parts. There were some ambient sections. There was some melodic black metal. I had the acoustic guitars. I had the solos. I really tried to just throw everything that I had at that album. It was my first real like full length, and it was, with a band that had, not to my credit at all, but to the credit of a lot of other people working hard for many years on albums, on shows, doing European tours, the works. They had built up a really great repertoire, so that was a great opportunity for me as a musician to get my stuff out there. That in a band in a world where a lot of people were going to hear it.
You did the vocals on that album, which is sometimes kind of hard to believe that one person did all the vocals because it sounds like all three major Mayhem singers meet
Yes.
Ishan in a choir.
Yeah, my goal was to try to combine all of these styles of the Mayhem and Gorgoroth singers, because those are two bands particularly I thought that had they had a number of different vocalists, and every single vocalist had a really distinct personality. You had Maniac, and he had this like whole aesthetic and attitude to himself. Dead, totally different attitude and aesthetic than Maniac. Then you had Attila, whose vocals were just so widely out there, which I thought was the most underused vocal technique in black metal. I think doing those types of vocals, not so much on a full album, but in short bursts, can really bring a lot of variety into a vocal style. So I look to those guys. Pest had a really mean tone from Gorgoroth. Gal was very creative, I thought. But I wanted to think beyond the just basic, like, here's my highs, here's my lows. Oh, maybe I have some mids, and that's the real wild card. Whoa. I wanted to try to think beyond that. Like, how many tones can I actually do? Can I, what if I did some vocals where I curled my tongue up to the roof of my mouth? What if I did some vocals that were like, some throat singing? What if I did some vocals that were, what if I had the drummer do a few vocals? What if I had the guitarist do some clean vocals? What if I did some death metal here and there? And then had a main tone to carry most of the work. What if I did some weird like Swartzen style, early days suicidal black metal vocals when like Silencer or something like. These were all things that I tried to touch on, like even if it was just briefly as in the vocals. I thought if I was gonna come into this legendary band, at least where we were, where I grew up. I mean, everyone from only into black metal in New Jersey knew about Abazagorath. I'd probably call out one or two of the shows. I would probably say it applies to the New York area as well, and maybe the whole Northeast American region. I felt like, all right, if I'm really going to take the mantle and be the singer of this extraordinary band, I really wanted to do justice to the amount of time that the band had been together, and really kind of raise the bar in terms of the vocals, because that band too had some interesting vocalists. There was the singer Boris. He wasn't on any of the albums, but was on an EP that they did and a split that they did around the same time. He had this really unique like thrash metal vocals, which it seemed totally out of step with black metal for a lot of people that were looking for just the standard package. But I thought those vocals were really, really interesting. And the vocalist on the first album, I mean, he's a total legend. He was in that band Prom. He's doing that band Ritual Chamber now. He was doing he was in all kinds of bands out in the West. Literally every band that he was in was on Moribund Records or Profound Lore Records. So I mean, he was a real heavyweight within the American scene. So I to be a part of that lineage, I really wanted to make sure that I was up to the task, and that's why I really put a lot of work into those vocals and trying to make them like even take the vocal style even further in a forward direction, basically.
Yeah, and he was the drummer on the To the Depths in Degradation.
Yes, that's true. Infestor, yes, yep. So yeah, a lot of big names were in that band. There a lot of the old head metalheads, thought that band to be somewhat important. So I really wanted to make sure that I was contributing in an appropriate manner.
So after the Satanic Verses, you left the band.
Yeah.
And you went to pick up on, you went back to a few old projects. You had the Angel Side that's been around since 2004, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, technically 2003. That was my first. That was my first black metal band, actually. And that was my only band for only consistent band for those years up until I joined Abazagorath. That was in right at the beginning where the whole DSBM sound started coming together. Back then it was called suicidal black metal, and if you really want to be a purist, I think you can distinguish them. It was before like that whole like 2006 era trend where everybody was taking the black and white pictures with the noose in the background, looking all sad, their frowns painted on their faces. And the earliest incarnation of that style, I think, was even more like maniacal, like kind of loopy and crazy, and oh gosh, this guy really belongs in a straitjacket, You had that band Silencer where the dude allegedly chopped his hands off. It's either really disturbing or just a really great promotional pictures. But
no, I found out the truth to that entire story.
Did you?
Yeah, I spent hours once. The whole Silencer thing is a fake. Those were
that's funny. What a great marketing scheme.
those were pig hoofs he put over his hands. Basically, the only person in his entire family who went to a psychiatric hospital was he had a brother who was like a firefighter or a nurse or worked in ambulance, a really kind of like high stress government job, where he was working 60 to 70 hours a week, saving people. And his brother just had like a complete meltdown from working insane hours and sleeping 4 hours a night. and that was the only thing that was fucked up with that family. It was all fake.
That's really funny. There was some really creative marketing stunts. That band Velvet Cocoon, the greatest of them. I had people telling me literally, "Oh, there's this band that uses diesel fuel to power their guitars," and they really believed it. And it was those guys were so out there. Oh gosh. Yeah, those were some fun times, definitely. But yeah, I started Angel Side as a death metal band originally. I even had a bass player and a drummer at first, but there was this short window of time in the early 2000s when I started playing in bands and trying to do music like seriously, where everybody thought new metal was lame or whatever, but we hadn't gotten to metalcore yet, and in that in between, people were jumping into death metal like temporarily, and that's exactly the time that I started. When I played my first shows or recorded my first demo. Then within, I would say, gosh, probably not even 2 years, everybody was like, "Oh, I want to do metalcore now," and I was like, "Oh, metalcore sucks." I wasn't into it at all. I wasn't into the aesthetic. I was serious about the death metal. Everybody around me wasn't really that serious about it. They were like, "Oh no, dude, those vocals are stupid." And then, a few years later, they jumped into deathcore and started doing those vocals again. It was a real headache. But no, I mean, I wanted to keep doing death metal. Eventually, I got into black metal, and that became my favorite genre. And I couldn't find anyone to jam with. I couldn't find anyone that was in my immediate area, at least. Everybody was notoriously into metalcore or hardcore, and that's all they wanted to do. It was before I had a car, I think, and I started jamming with the Baz guys, which was several years later, and they were in a completely different part of New Jersey that was a little more urban, where black metal was a little more popular. So anyway, I had this software called Cool Edit Pro, which later became Adobe Audition, that was commonly pirated back in those days. And one of the bands I was in had a copy of it, so I downloaded it and I started doing just some solo demos with these awful sounding drums from a drum machine. And I mean, I was so serious. I was totally on my own, but I was so serious about it. But yeah, unfortunately, in those days, I just couldn't get a good sound. I knew nothing about engineering. I didn't know anything about very, very basic stuff like, just panning your guitars, or even recording more than one guitar track, or even like deleting like that little space between pressing record and then fumbling around your guitar. Like, those were all alien concepts to me. So those earliest demos ended up being just terrible in quality. And I mean, there's a lot of low quality black metal that people love, but this was so bad that like there was no audible snare drum basically, and the bass drum was like an EDM sounding bass drum, so it was a mess. It was a mess for several years, but I at one point that was my pride and joy, and I had hoped to evolve that into something to be like a legitimate band. I mean, I started as this one-man metal musician exactly around that wave of Zaster and Leviathan, where they were in all these metal magazines and stuff. And, I kind of wanted to be that guy. Like, I wanted to be a part of that, and I thought felt like I was a part of that, but the quality of my work just wasn't there. I just didn't have the patience in those early days to really, really spend a lot of time on those recordings. I didn't have the money to put into those recordings, to put into equipment, to send to somebody to mix it properly or anything. And I just had serious ego problems and all those, a collection of those things were just always holding me back in those days. So yeah, I had a handful of demos. One of them was on some French label on a cassette, some like stupid 20 copy run or something, but nothing really materialized. After Abazagorath ended, or after I left rather, because they're still going on to this day without me, I tried doing this really innovative type, I guess you could call it progressive band, just to really, really push, see how far I could go in terms of my musical ability, called Wall of Water. The drummer of that band was the drummer of Disma and Death Fortress, and formerly Fina Brown, my good friend Sean. It got a lot of great press in the metal blogs like Invisible Oranges and Clean Singing and stuff, but like I just moved to New York City shortly after quitting Abazagorath, and there was just no way to really do anything with that. And yeah, I mean, I just didn't really plug into the New York scene out here the way I thought I would. There were some serious differences I had with the personality types out here. I didn't really know where to go, and I looked back at my old Angel Side project, and that I put so much emotion into that. I had so many riffs and stuff that I was proud of, and I was like, why don't I give this a chance again? I've got some connections now. I've got an extra 10 years of experience now, having toured on the road and stuff, having been in a legitimate recording studio a few times, and maybe I could do a better job this time. So yeah, I ended up doing a couple of albums. One was pretty well received. One was absolutely abhorred. And that served sort of as a intermediate period before I started Dawnbreaker, which would also be a solo project that would end up being my most, I think, career defining band, I would say.
So yeah, obviously, you had that complete change of lyrical direction and everything. Your whole world was kind of literally flipped on its head. So did you feel you had to distance yourself from all that stuff?
No, no. I actually no. So yeah, my big career changer was obviously my conversion to Christianity and my newfound faith, and that happened even while I was still in Abazagorath, believe it or not, at the very, very end. So it was a while before I really started taking it seriously. It happened in as early as 2014, I think. But at first I didn't really feel a need to distance, because it was like I was a believer, but I was still distrustful of organized religion for a year or two. I still didn't, I looked at musicians like Tom from Slayer. He was a Christian doing Slayer, or Hellhammer. I heard, I know somebody that toured with Hellhammer that told me that he was a Christian, that he said a prayer before every show.
I've heard that rumor a million times.
Yeah,
even if
it's a rumor.
But there must be something there. There's Antesto. Even if it's not true, he at least shows some sympathy towards Christianity.
Yeah, he played drums on that Ancestor album. So you have the drummer of the most evil band of the world, and he did drums on a Christian metal album. So, but I saw those guys in secular bands with darker themes, and I moved away from the really like more spiritually wicked themes that I had been exploring, or the real like anti-God themes I'd been exploring throughout my career until that point. It's more just like almost like fantasy, like sci-fi type, Lovecraftian lyrics for a few years, which was the case on the Angel full lengths. But yeah, it was a while. I didn't immediately feel an urge to really flip and go all in until I kind of realized that like I just wasn't really being true. I wasn't being honest. I wasn't being truthful with what I was doing with my music, and I'd become so I started diving so deep into the world of Christianity, where I was doing doing worship team for these like I wouldn't call them mega churches, but same kind of deal. Where I was doing like, I was really involved in the culture, and I was spending so much time just reading the Bible and prayer, and even in I was even kind of like testing the waters in Christian mysticism a little bit at one point. So I kind of just realized, I'm just not being true, and I sort of see the more I dove into the faith, um, a lot of aspects of it that I thought were like very metal and that could work in metal, like the Crusades is a great example. I mean, the Crusaders were savage. The Crusader epics were, no different than the mythology themed metal bands, in my opinion, the Viking bands or anything. It's the same kind of attitude and feel, and you know the Old Testament is rich with these foreboding sacrifice and really graphic, like there's an entire book of just like dismembering the inner guts of animals, or like there's so much in the Bible that's so I realized it was so metal. Like you know uh there's all kinds of war and violence and people drinking urine and eating feces and all kinds of everything you see in death metal. I saw in the Bible the first few times I read through it. So I started realizing, like maybe I should just be honest about who I am, and I recognized that was almost like that was just going to completely erase the brand that I had been building up for so many years, and that was something that was hard to do, and hard to make that jump and let go of. But at that point, I was just like, you know what? I don't really care about this brand. Like, I don't really care. It's too exhausting to try to live a double life, And that was kind of the way it was the whole time, even in my secular days. I I was trying to keep up what I thought was the appropriate metal image, and then like on the other hand, I was really close with my family. On the other hand, like there was a lot of love in me and stuff, and I felt like I had to hide that. I had to hide the what I mean, like the family Christmas pictures from my social media sites or whatever it was. So it got to a point where I just got tired of that, and it was like that's not the legacy that I want to leave. That's not what I wanted to be remembered as. And that's where the whole motivation of Dawnbreaker kind of came, is like, what's going to be my legacy? Like when, I don't know how many years I got left, and I want to leave something that really, really honestly and accurately tells my story. But honestly, making the switch was incredibly liberating. At the same time as it was also like, it's like, man, I had just built up this brand. I made so many connections in this scene, and most of them are probably never going to touch this stuff. At the same time, it was like, wait a minute, what if I were to just retcon everything I've ever done? To retroactively discontinue my career up into that point. What if I were to revisit all those early works that I did, all those completely abysmal tier demos that I did? Like, what if I were to take those compositions and take my now 12 or 13 years of experience and rework those into something new, and forget that they happened in the past, but create something new and exciting with that, and do the things that I couldn't do in my secular career, like maybe doing something more in the Dark Funeral style, doing something more in the having more keyboards, doing something maybe more symphonic, which would be a death knell, and any other band that I had done. So what first started out as like, I'm just going to be honest about it, who I am. I'm going to be honest about like the culture that I'm immersed in, rather than trying to do some like, try to act like a expert on H.P. Lovecraft, at only reading like one or two books or writings, or trying to be whatever, operate within whatever parameters that like I'm not really engaged with at all anymore. It ended up being really liberating and really positive, and I think the stuff I've done with Dawnbreaker is turn out to be some of my best work personally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're not the only guy who is like that. You know, a great band, you know, Jan from Samoth is also very public about him
Yes.
cuddling his kids and his wife and just having a good time. And look at the kind of music he makes, right?
Jan is such an alpha. He's such an alpha male. That interview, I listened to that you did a couple weeks back. Man, that was I was a little intimidated trying to follow that. That was epic. Yeah, what a total badass that dude is. Absolutely. There's no questioning that.
Yeah. So you started with Dawnbreaker, and you know, you were saying earlier about, you know, you wanted to do all the kind of more melodic black metal stuff, Dark Funerals, early Dimmu Borgir. But then, you know, your first album, Deus Vult, sounds more like you know, Old Sepultura, and Autopsy than any Emperor derived bands.
Absolutely. So the story behind Deus Vult is that originally I wasn't planning on Dawnbreaker being like my main band. Like I thought I would still keep up with Angel Side even at that point. I thought it would be cool to do some kind of like Crusader theme band as a side project. You know, I saw a lot of parallel to metal culture and some of the Crusader aesthetics that you would see around, like, you know, certain political political niches, I guess. So so yeah, I mean, at first I wasn't even planning that being my main project. The Deus Vult album is actually roughly half of the songs are from a war metal demo that I did around that time. And I had seen so many war metal bands when I was touring with Abazagorath. Literally, like, you know, 2 out of the 3 or 4 bands at every single show was trying to do war metal. And I always thought it was kind of dumb, but I was always like, maybe there's a way I could do it where it's different, where it's cool. What if I just pulled from everything? And yeah, the first Sepultura album was sort of the foundation, but I looked to the first wave of American black metal, like Demon Sea and Profanatica even. I looked into you know, Beharit and Archgoat and stuff like that. I would always go on little binges with those bands in my secular days, but I mean, this was the time. I was like, all right, what if I just did one war metal album and saw what I could? And the idea is too that like my earliest days as a musician was in death metal, so I wanted to do something. I wanted Dawnbreaker to be sort of like the earlier albums to be more of like a brief summary of my secular career, which I wouldn't have expected the Christian scene to be familiar with. So I thought I would start with like the very, very earliest material that I had, which was, you know, this thrashier kind of death metal stuff. And some of the tracks on that date back to as old as like maybe 2004, 2005. I first wrote them, and so that was the idea behind that. Like I don't really like war metal. I don't go out of my way to listen to it at all anymore. But I still wanted to know, kind of like personally, like, could I do this in a way that was cool and creative and you know, could I do it in a way where I would find something that I wasn't finding in those nuclear war now bands? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Could you do like make good music? And also, I mean, you did something they don't do. You went past the 4th fret.
Yeah, I always wonder what those riffs would sound like if they had a counter melody on another guitar. You know, maybe having one guitar doing the atonal stuff, but another guitar doing, you know, some kind of speed picked arpeggio, some D minor chord or something like that, and it sounded a lot better than I expected. I mean, I dove deeper into the bands themselves. I mean, like Beharit, you know, any war metal band or musician or fan is going to say they love Beharit, but there's so many aspects to Beharit that are lost completely. There had all these weird keyboards and all these interesting like interludes and stuff, and like I tried to pull more of like what made that band cool. You know, one of the aspects being keyboards. That wasn't imitated by any of the 10 million bands that are trying to clone their sound. So I took that. I tried to dig deeper into these bands and pull from the less the less overused aspects of them and make something with it.
I honestly do hate when people compare, Beherit to any other war metal band because, what Marco was doing was just completely ahead of everyone else, if I may say so, in the Finnish black metal scene. Even the 2009 album Engram was such a shock. The electronic stuff he did in between, a lot of it is lost on most people, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it was creative stuff. I mean that first, I don't know if you could even call it an album. I know there it was more or less just a compilation of their early stuff. I mean, that was basically like death grind with like black ambient, like, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff just thrown together there. It was so unique and so interesting. I would rank them above any war metal or bestial metal, whatever you want to call it. I would rank them high above all of that crowd.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think NWN has had the most difficulty selling them compared to other bands. That just surprises me,
Yeah, they're that label's a thrift store, man. I don't know. It's like whatever's the most basic, like that lowest common denominator theory is kind of funny. Whatever's the most basic, plain, like inoffensive, is what sells with that crowd. So it's like, let's just cram it all and strip it down as basic as it can. That doesn't surprise me at all to hear that, to be honest.
So at this point now, you're essentially churning out an album or two per year. So very quickly after that, you came back with Total Depravity. Great cover work, which features the Tower of Babylon.
Yes, the Tower of Babel, correct.
Yeah, Babel. Yeah. Oof. God, I'm kind of rusty with some theology right now, but yeah.
It's totally cool. Totally understandable. It's more or less the same thing, the same concept. So
yeah, exactly.
You're not in much error.
Then for that, you went for a much more kind of, not bouncy, but somewhat more joyful than Deus Vult, a much more, a lot more synths.
Definitely. Yeah. So my goal in that album was that album was actually a re-recording almost in I think there's maybe 2 new songs and the rest is just a re-recording of the first Angel Side album and the first and the EP that directly preceded it. Both came around 2009. Yeah, I always was frustrated how that first album just came about so poorly. It did such a terrible job on the recording. And so I had been wanting to re-record that for a long time and revisit that material for a long time. I tried to do basically a mix of Norsecore and some of those like some of those more like black ambient bands like Leviathan. Basically all the stuff I liked back in like the days where I wrote a lot of that material that 2005 2006 era. I tried to experiment a little bit more with ambient guitars, with some more strange tones and sounds. Originally wanted to do more keyboards on that album, but it ended up sounding a lot like, it was more in that style. There's another album I should mention from a band called Thunderbolt, this Polish band. There's an album that they're really, overall their career, most of their stuff sucked, I thought, but they had a really, really sketchy stuff in their earlier days, but they had this album called The Burning Deed of Deceit, and the technique on that was really, really influential. I didn't realize that until even recently, like maybe the last few months. That I used to listen to that album all the time, and that was really, really influential in my style, like those D minor chords with the last note maybe going down a half step or up a half step. So it was a mix of that, a mix of the American wave of 2004, the Northcore bands. There was a lot of Dark Funeral involved. Um, I always wanted to be the kind of musician that did a different album every time they did an album. You know, you have two camps of bands. You know, you have a band like Autopsy where they do the same album every time and then they try to perfect it a little bit more. And you have a band like Emperor where every single album is different, you know, or Dissection, or and I always wanted to be a band like that. Even Death, you know, they did like what, 7 albums maybe. Everything was completely different than what had come before it. So I wanted to do something more in the hyper blast, you know, kind of melodic, kind of fast. And that's where that album came about and that whole style came about.
Yeah. And, and then after that, 2020 was one of your best years in many ways overall, after a lot of experience, a lot of bands. You completely went back to your, a lot of people know this, but you absolutely love the early French black metal stuff. Not Deathspell Omega, not the weird stuff that came in the 2000s, but, Vlad Tepes, Mutilation.
Absolutely.
Trying to think of the non-controversial ones.
Celestia was a really big influence. Oh yeah, Celestia's music is great. I still listen to them. I love that style. I like their aesthetic. They took that whole I think they took Dead's like kind of gothic theme, Transylvania, whatever. I think they took that to such a creative and elegant new level. I really like that band. But Mutilation they were one of my favorite bands throughout those years, and that aesthetic was so out there, but I found it so relatable for some reason. It was so strange, this masochistic, suicidal nature plus vampires plus
plus sniffing heroin on the ground.
yeah. Oh man. Oh gosh.
It's weird. I know it sounds majestic, but it sounds like at the same time it sounds completely depraved, and it's so very bizarre. Weird. Yeah.
But I really resonated with that stuff, man. I grew up when I was young. I used to really like classical music. My mom read that if you play classical music for your kids before they take a test the next day, it'll improve their test scores. So I got into the habit when I was very young of listening to classical music when I was falling asleep at night, and that really resonated somewhere deep in my subconscious. And some of those bands like Mutilation and Celestia, even though the recording, the sound quality was just so awful, the bass was out of tune, those the melodies in those riffs were just with those minor harmonic scale, tremolo riffs, they were just so good. I really resonated with those, I think, for that reason.
Yeah, and they flipped metal on its head because everyone was using more and more distortion, and they were like, you know what, our guitars almost sound like jangly folk guitars.
Yeah, and Mutilation they were so dynamic for a raw black metal band too. Like there was this real catchiness to that first album, those first 2 albums. If you could get through, and it was really rewarding to me because you had those layers of hiss and distortion, and it was just, you had to really dig to even hear the riffs and even hear the notes, and it felt so rewarding to me to dig through all that static and that noise and find those riffs that nobody would find, and they were so good, and they were so so catchy and so resonating. It felt like a journey, and I think that's an appeal. It's a really interesting part of black metal when it's extremely low fidelity like that, is when you have this really well constructed songwriting. You have these really memorable and interesting riffing and just the sound in general. But there's there's just no money to make it sound the way it should. But you're able to get through that hiss, you're able to dig through that noise, and like where most people would hear that and just turn it off immediately, you're able to hear this classical elegance that, you know, I feel is really prevalent in those old albums. So yeah, I mean it's really interesting how that the appeal to that and why, and I thought a lot about why it appeals so much to me, but I think that's my consensus on that.
Yeah, it's also why I hate war metal, because when you're younger and you say, "Oh wait, if it sounds bad, there must be something good hidden," and then some bands like Mutilation, you get to it and it's just incredible. Some of the early Mayhem demos as well. A lot of bands where it's just hidden behind layers of noise, and then you got the opposite where some bands they actually do that because they don't have any ideas, they don't have any riffs. There are no melodies.
It's a matter of insecurity personally. I think war metal is appealing because people just want so desperately to be seen as true and cult, and I'm so underground that I could find the most disgusting, like the most meat-headed crap that you can possibly imagine, and there's no way you could be more raw than this, and there's no way that it could be more extreme to this, and there's no melody and there's no music at all. I think that's what drives that, and I think that's why it's so popular and such a nuisance. Because you've had so many trends come and go with black metal. You've had symphonic black metal. You've had DSBM. Then you had the Cascadian wave. Then you had the hipster, the post black metal, and every single one of those trends fizzled out at some point. And this damn new metal just this damn war metal, which in my opinion isn't that distinct from new metal personally.
Yes, same breakdowns. Those pick scrape breakdowns. You know the one I mean.
if you took the riffs from Korn's second album, Life is Peachy, and you just played them in a tremolo style, you wouldn't have any difference in what you hear on Nuclear War Now bands. It's literally the same exact riff, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, Conqueror's album, is basically a cover of Korn's "All Day I Dream About Sex."
It really is. It really, truly, honestly is, and it's so funny. And it's a testament to how, for some people, aesthetic is everything, and for some people, their engagement with metal and their engagement with music is purely aesthetic driven. And if you have that black and white picture with the red logo with the gradient lay and the like the goofy skeletons, and it doesn't matter that it's the same music as Korn. They'll be like, dude, this is the greatest thing ever. Then they'll look at Korn and be like, this is awful. Oh, they're wearing jumpsuits and Jenko jeans or whatever. Like they're wearing high tops. I can't. I think a lot about that. I think a lot about the psychology of the listener, and like, we've reached the point where it's so aesthetic driven, and it's something that really frustrated me, and almost like got me disinterested in metal as a whole, is like just how, if you don't have the right package, you can't listen to, or you can't enjoy the music. If you don't have the right colors of the cover, or if you don't have the right look in the stupid band photos, it just doesn't work with people. And I think like it's interesting. Like I think what you hear before you even hear the band is going to affect, for a lot of people, if they even enjoy it or not. Let's say you have somebody that has nenever heard Demolik. Let's use Demolik as an example. And you just said, oh dude, Demolik's such a hipster band, dude. Like all the posers like them, like all the hipsters like them. That's not an inaccurate statement that all the hipsters like them at all. But if someone were to hear that before they hear the music, they would probably mistake all that quirkiness, all that goof, the just the weirdness of the riffs and the song titles, the album titles backwards and stuff. They might look at that and be like, oh, this is just some hipster like parody of death metal,
Yeah.
And would miss out on the truth of Demolik, which is like this is some of the best, most creative death metal, and has for years been held by everyone in the the metal underground as one of the most interesting and just innovative death metal records. And it's unfortunate that humanity has become so carnal at this point where they can't just see through all the noise and just hear the music and just like the music for the music, and that's really that's something I don't know why I've been reading a lot of psychology books lately, and the more I dive into Carl Jung, the more I think about stuff like that, and when I listen to metal or think about metal, I start thinking in more of this like psychoanalytical sense, and I'm more curious. I hope we see that explored more, those more books. I know Lords of Chaos it's totally cool and trendy to hate that book, but there's all kinds of there's a real wealth of like the into the psyche of metalhead that's being covered in that book and those interviews, looking at the parents and the families and the backgrounds and what kind of the social class that they're born into. I'm really interested in understanding more of how that relates to the metal listener and the metal musician and the metal fan. I've always been interested in stuff like that, and you don't really see behind that veil too often.
Yeah, then there's a lot of contradictions and just trying to get to the bottom of it all. But I can't remember who said that. I think we spoke about it once in private some time ago, and you said that one of the issues is that those guys were all from somewhat liberal households, like high earning middle class yet liberal households that weren't part of their church, and that influenced the kids to go down this path of making that kind of music.
Yeah. One of the things uncovered in Lords of Chaos is that none of these musicians, Euronymous or Varg or anybody, they never came from a religious Christian family. That's not really the case for a lot of black metal, especially out here in America. That dude from Profanatica, that the one that died, I don't remember the name, Paul maybe. I mean, his dad was a Baptist pastor. Like it's culturally very different out here. But that early wave, that wasn't like they were all Christians like rebelling against their parents or whatever. Those were all kids of atheists, And the thing about it, like Euronymous was like, 21, 22, and he owned a record shop. Like I don't think that was his money, I think Euronymous was what we would consider this, your classic like like the kid from liturgy, like your classic like trust fund kid, like that. I think that was the case for them. I mean, Varg in one of his Folian videos, I think, showed his old house. It was a nice, suburban household. Like these were kids coming from upper class families, and I think it was more like they're the second generation of families that abandoned Christianity. And I think that this hostility to Christianity wasn't really so much the product of rebellion against common social structure. I think it was more of a just an early indicator of how the secularization of society and where that was going in these European nations, especially in Scandinavia. Officially, Norway and Finland are, very Christian countries because you're, some of these nations you're automatically just registered as a Christian, but the church attendance is something like 7%. It's actually a super secular, so it's less of a rebellion than it actually looks like. To American media and to Americans, like that looks like a huge rebellion because at least in coming out of the 80s, like, that was still a really huge part of American culture. But yeah, I mean, that wasn't really the case with them. And a lot of metal fans, I mean, my father's he was a practicing Catholic his whole life, and he took it seriously. And, for me, that was a rebellion, but that wasn't really the case for those early musicians and those early households. And yeah, I mean, like, look at Snore, it's Snore or Snore. I don't know how you pronounce his name. The mayhem guitar player that went to jail for 10 years.
Doing nothing, poor
Being in the
guy.
wrong place at the wrong time, basically.
Yeah, just smoking a cigarette and then dropping it because he was in complete and absolute shock.
Yeah, I mean, look at what he's doing. Like he's doing music. He's doing like music for art studios now and art projects. You know, that tells you a lot about what what social world that guy came from. And I think that metal's always a mix between social classes. You'll find, like I doubt Faust was from like a high-end household personally. But it's always been a mix. I mean, Varg's dad had a real serious job as an arms dealer, selling technologies to Iraq, traveling, moving the family around. Yeah, I mean, they all came from like this kind of ritzy upper class, and I think things like that are really interesting to me. How your social class resonates with what kind of metal you like, and why metal tends to be more, certain types of metal that's popular in cities isn't what's popular in rural countries. You look at cities. I think there's you're more likely to find death metal bands and black metal bands, but if you go to the Midwest out here in the States, it's all those scene bands that are more popular. There's a real dynamic there that I think can be explored a lot more, and I'm very interested in understanding a lot more.
Let's talk about, for me, the real hero of the Norwegian scene, Snorri Blackthorn. I mean, he comes out of prison. His album is an absolute monster. Have you heard the first Thorns record?
I love it.
It's incredible.
He is the most underrated musician in metal history by far. If you listen to those early Thorns demos, that's the first time you really hear like some of what became Hessian style, some of what became the style in Dissection, or those D minor chords, picking them note by note, or just bashing them out, like really interesting bass lines. Those Thorns demos were clear evidence that he was really the most innovative of all the guitar players. I agree 110% with that statement that he's an unsung hero in that scene. I loved the Thorns album. I absolutely loved it. I probably loved that 2-song demo they did a little bit more, because those songs are just so legendary. The Airy Descent and Funeral Marches to the Grave, I believe. Those are just such legendary songs. I liked the split he did with Emperor too, probably a little bit more than the album, but the album was great. But yeah, that Thorns versus Emperor split, that was probably my favorite work of Thorns, because you got those old songs, but heard in just a completely new way with a completely different style. It's something little. I mean, personally, I don't even mind like all the industrial elements. Like I thought that was interesting. I thought that was it was done tastefully, unlike what you hear most of the time.
Do you know what's hilarious about that record? Is that each band covered a song by the other band. Thorns did the Cosmic Keys, which I think Cosmic Keys to My Creation, and
yes,
yeah, and Emperor,
Creation of Times, yes,
yeah, and Emperor did Airy Descent.
Yeah,
that is insane.
And that was one of my favorite Emperor songs at first. I didn't realize it was a cover. I was when I was dumb and we didn't have metal archives in those early years, so I had no idea that was even a cover. I just thought it was a great song. Yeah, that was one of the most creative splits ever done, I think. And yeah, the idea of covering the other band's songs, and then going, and it's funny, the Emperor's versions of the Thorns songs were even more true to the originals. Like the Emperor version of like Funeral Marches to the or Airy Descent was like it was just awesome, and then you hear the Thorns version and it's like an industrial beat, real slow, like doom, like so their version was actually more true to the song, I thought, than the actual band re-recording.
But yeah, honestly, I think that Euronymous took most of his style from Blackthorn. everything, maybe even the tremolo picking. I think the whole sense of melody, the chords, the arpeggios. Honestly, if anyone who's listening to this has proof of the opposite, I'd be willing to take it. But as far as I'm concerned, Thorns is the man.
Absolutely. There's no question. I would love to see a breakdown riff. I love this. I thought about doing this one time. In the brief time I was writing articles here and there. I thought about doing a breakdown of like who wrote every riff on that album, because you had all kinds of style. The album I'm sorry, I have too many tabs open in my brain right now. The Mysteries, the Mayhem album, the Legend. I would love to see a breakdown of who wrote every riff on that album, because there's such a variety of techniques there that are so far from what you heard on Death Crush or on Live in Leipzig. Some of those riffs were written by, I heard that Dead and Necro Butcher actually wrote Freezing Moon. I heard that it's clear that like songs like Curse in Eternity or probably even the title track, those are probably all written by Blackthorn. Probably Life Eternal, obviously. Maybe not Life Eternal actually, because that was around for a little while longer, but definitely.
Varg might have written Life Eternal, because the bass lines he plays on that song are just absolutely insane.
Yeah, I learned so much about playing bass from that song. The bass was like the real melody of that song, the real driving force. Guitars were just the rhythm,
Yeah, exactly. The guitars are following them, and then Varg's playing that melody, and then the guitars eventually pick it up. They all play it in like unison later on.
Yeah, there were so many creative techniques from that album. There's nothing really like it, and I always took a real scholarly analysis of that album and tried to pick those techniques and not replicate the whole thing like note for note, but tried to incorporate that into stuff that I was doing. Mixing, and I think the first Dawnbreaker album is the place where I did that the most, where I tried to have some songs, like you have a song like Pagan Fears where it's just all atonal, I guess you could call it word metal, like on the first like 3 or 4 frets, all the notes next to each other. Then having riffs like that, and then taking riffs like maybe from the title track, that were melodic. That's what like what we were saying before, with that first Dawnbreaker album being so distinct from other war metal. That's part of the formula that I use to make it sound the way that it does. Is like, all right, what if instead of only replicating Pagan Fears, we took that technique, and then the next riff was like from the title track, and that was a big influence on that album. Was a big influence on all my work, and by far one of the most innovative albums I've ever heard.
I think it's time to come clean with a few things, right? So, as a lot of people might know, the first album ever released on Hessian Firm, nice little black and white cover, was by a small unknown band called Hosts of Lord, which you did under a pseudonym. I
do believe this is the first place where I've publicly revealed that I've been the musician behind that project. I thought about having fun with some old school black metal aesthetics, and I've now been using a pseudonym, Matthias, and this will be the first time where that's going to be revealed. I'm sure it'll be a day or two until we see it on Metal Archives. Somebody looking for brownie points, but I had so much material. So if you revisiting our conversation or a little bit earlier, that Dawnbreaker was meant to be a retelling of my whole story, my whole career in metal up until that point. All the different sounds that I did and the sounds that I always wanted to do. When I wrote down all of the places I could go with Dawnbreaker, which originally was supposed to be my last project, I had hoped where I would just do everything. I realized I just had so many albums. I had a good 12 albums at least of material in all different genres. And I was just, I did the first two albums. Then I was like, man, how am I going to do all this in a way that the progression seems natural, where each album feels like it's building on the one before it. But also, how am I going to do this within a reasonable amount of time where I'm still even engaged in doing metal albums? And I could have done maybe 2 albums a year, 4 albums a year all the time, but I feel like bands that do that really burn out. Like look at a band like Stryborg or Drowning Light. Those guys, people look at that and they're just like, oh, it's just vanity. It's just they're just over releasing stuff. And I was like, maybe I should split the canon, so to speak, in some way. And I, thought long and hard how I was going to do that, how I was going to split the canon, what albums belong in which canon, like how is that going to work? And that first Hessian firm release was actually my first black metal demo ever. Basically, plus other, a bunch of other songs that I recorded around that time, and that came very, very close to being the third Dawnbreaker album, actually. But I wanted to do a really lo-fi version of that, and I really wanted to do, like a real like early Dark Throne type aesthetic, I guess. And I was like, man, this just won't work. This just won't work coming off of like 2 like kind of cleaner sounding albums, where suddenly there's no more guitar solos. Suddenly there's, it just didn't feel right. So I looked, and the deciding factor eventually in where to split the canon became, let's split it based on quality. Let's have a canon that's got good production and a canon that's got really raw production, because those are 2 different camps of listeners, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Let's also have a canon where the riffs are more technical. It's more about the songwriting. It's more about the the creative riffs and the having death metal parts and black metal parts. Then let's have a project where it's more about the atmosphere and it's more about long form riffing, maybe with longer songs and colder atmosphere and more minimalistic kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
So that's why I eventually thought I could get through all this material in half the time without oversaturating my release schedule if I just splintered off into a second band. And thus, Hosts of Lord was born, and I'm very proud to and very honored to be the first Hessian firm release, because I really love what you're doing with this label. It's really continuing the true spirit of the underground. I love how you got this podcast going, and so yeah, I mean it's a real honor to be that first release, but really to just be a part of it at all.
Yeah, I remember you showing me some time ago prophetic visions of Harrowing with Despair, and you were saying that it was like very mutilation inspired, and when people say there are some bands when it's inspired by it's like Suffocation, like great bands that sadly inspired a lot of terrible stuff. I was actually really scared of listening to this, and I heard it. I was like, yeah, you did it really well, because I love you. The Celestia, because we've spoken, we both love that harmonic minor scale because you can make a lot of rich melodies from it. And you did it so well, even like those kind of parts where you're just screaming and playing these kind of like almost sloppy, out of time arpeggios, everything is so rich on that prophetic visions of Harrowing with Despair. and then with afflicting blackness of day, you combine it with a lot more traditional Norwegian black metal.
Let me give you the story of those two. Those two albums are actually based off of my earliest demos in black metal ever. Like I said before, like they were my first attempt at those were just off. Like it just came out totally awful, totally forgotten in time. No physical releases of any of those. But those melodies, it told so much of like where I was at in on so many levels, emotionally, spiritually at that time. And I really wanted that story to be told. And I remember one day, I was in some hotel, taking it in some jacuzzi, actually listening to. I was listening to Ulver's. I think maybe their third album, the last of the black metal albums, and it reminded me a lot of that stuff. And I was later that day I was reading an interview of how like he's like, yeah, I just wanted to go and just do one super raw black metal album, and then it hit me like I should re-record those. I should revisit those, And it might be interesting now, like 15 years after when they were originally written, how that story would be told with having done over a dozen albums on every format, on cassettes, vinyls, having toured most of the states, as far as Texas, and what would it be like to revisit those, but do them in a way that was in line, aesthetically and lyrically in line with where I was now at this point in my life. And I always had notes when I read through the Bible of like all these interesting themes, like the prophetic books. Like I would read something like, and I was handed a scroll, and I consumed the scroll, and on it was written wailing and lamentations. And I thought, oh man, that's such a great like metal aesthetic. A lot of the Hosts of Lord style and aesthetic, I should also mention, was from my friend Nick, who's he's got this band Megalith Grave, and he was telling me like, dude, and I've never met anyone in my life more committed to like the true spirit of like the Orthodox black metal style, and I never met anyone who was more minimalistic in their recording. Like he would have like all these demos where it was just like there were no cymbals, no bass, no cymbals, just one riff in every song. And there was this Portuguese movement centered around the Signal Rex record label that he was getting involved with, and they were releasing all this stuff out on vinyl and stuff, and like all these bands. He's like, dude, you have to hear this stuff they're doing in Portugal. These Portugal bands. It's a style that's I've heard coined. They call it ultra orthodox black metal. Like, and it's these really long and like mysterious, foreboding song titles, and it's got a lot of the mutilation / the Black Legions type sound that so influenced me in those early days. So these were all different pieces that I had kind of like organized to some degree. But then I really started piecing them all together, and I was like, I think I'm ready to do another project, and I want to do it in this ultra orthodox style, but I'm still going to be true to my Christian faith. That's like the root of everything. Like, is there a way to put all of this together where I'm not being super obvious about the Christianity of it? Like, it's not like I've got a big cross on the front, and it's not like I'm marketing it as Christian metal. Going back to our conversation about like, the listener and how the aesthetics immediately affect whether they like something or not, I wanted to see if I could almost like sneak this past the goalie in a way where it's got the exact aesthetic, it's got the exact feel and sound of those Portuguese bands who all seem influenced by mutilation and the Black Legions. But if it was actually, if the content was actually Christian, but somehow it worked, and that was the idea behind that project. And that's why I was like, maybe I'll just not even have my name on this, you know, and not even like try to bank off of like the success I've had with Dawnbreaker. What if I just did something different? Just something that was true to the spirit that I was in when I came up with this material originally. And yeah, I mean, the earliest stuff I did is probably most of it's on the second album actually, but which I recorded first, I think. But I mean, both albums were kind of around the same time. I just kind of organized them a little bit differently, I guess, when I wrote them. So yeah, I mean, the two most influential, the most influential stuff for me in the very beginning was Norwegian scene, you know, Dark Throne, Birds of Mayhem, the early Emperor stuff. Then the Black Legion scene, and then also I should mention, I know our a lot of the Hessian firm fans will disagree with me on this, but I was also really influenced by Judas Iscariot, maybe just because they were, when I first got into black metal, the big name in terms of American black metal, maybe that affected me a certain way. But there's something about that aesthetic that always resonated with me. I really enjoyed their last 2 or 3 albums. So that was kind of the formula I was using in the beginning, and yeah, that was the sound for those first 2 albums that I was really going for. The first one was, you know, I kind of, the dividing line between that material was kind of like, the first was just more really out there, I think, really just cold and vile. And then by the time the second one was more about the atmosphere, and I started using keyboards, which I hope to continue from now on. Yeah, I mean, that stuff was so powerful for me when I was first putting that first writing that and first doing that on those terrible demos some 15 years ago, and it was a real joy to revisit that and repackage that in a way that I think it will be more properly remembered by.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I see what you were doing in terms of aesthetic, right? But you know, I'm a firm believer of the kazoo test. You know, if it sounds good on a kazoo, it sounds good on any format, right? And you know, everyone can agree that, you know, Hosts of Lord passes the kazoo test. You know, did you spend a lot of time really working those old riffs, or was everything just there from your youth and it was like, that's it, let's put it on you know, more professional format, you know, let's get Reaper opened up?
It was a little bit of both, I think. For example, the song that you loved from the first album, Haze of Prophetic Ecstasy, that's almost note for note exactly the same as I originally recorded it. I actually dumbed it down a little bit because the original version of that had like the melody at the end was played on piano, I think, and I think I had some keyboards in the break. So that, but more or less, that was note for note almost exactly the same. When we look at the second album, the first 2 songs there, I added a ton of melodies. There were no counter melodies on the first song on Afflicted Blackness of Day. The original version of that, it was just the second guitar part the whole time. So I did a lot in terms of putting melodies on that one. I guess the second album is a lot more caked up than it used to be. I put a lot more layers. Sometimes the material, so I think the song Banished to Winter's Maze, the guitar parts are not in any way different than how those originally were, but the bass I changed a lot. I added keyboards, so it's kind of a mix. But I guess I did add a lot to the original. I mean, if you were to hear the first Angel Side demo, the tempo of the songs was probably always in 120 beats per minute. I don't think I understood how to change the tempo of the drum machine. Like, So it was probably, the songs were probably a lot longer, but it was the same core riffs and the same song structure even from that early material.
All right, so you very recently you released a cassette version of a Chamber Above Cosmic Waters with I can't remember, Folkvanger Records. No.
Yeah, it came out only 2 weeks ago. What a great label Folkvanger is. Such a good natured guy that guy is. I think Cold Nation, this one of the more popular of the, I guess, hipster metal blogs, called them the most important new label of 2017, and I think that's pretty accurate. Of all the cassette labels, I can't think of any that are just better to work with. He's a great guy. He did a great job with the cassette from what I've seen. It's came out so recently that I don't think I've even received the mail yet of the physical copies of that. But I did one of my random side projects from years ago. Was one of their first releases, and yeah, I was really happy with the job he did with that and with the job he did with the new cassette. But I look forward to returning to Hessian Firm for the next 110%. Yeah, as far as the A Chamber Above Cosmic Waters albums is concerned, that's got a really great story to it. I completely improvised that. I was reading one of the Christian Psalms about and the content was a very, very widely known story across many cultures, dating from the Sumerians to the Mesopotamians, of a great hunter slaying a cosmic serpent. In the Christian version, that hunter is Yahweh, the Christian God, and the Jewish version, and I guess all the Abrahamic religions would interpret it this way. That's actually part of their story too. That Yahweh is a great hunter, slaying the dragon Leviathan, this great chaos serpent in the primordial age, and creating creation out of its innards. And I thought that, and just reading that, and just reading some of the translation I was using, was just using this beautiful literature for the Book of Job, for the writings of the prophet Habakkuk. I was so inspired that I remember I just, with no drums, just started recording like just some riffs that were just coming to mind, and eventually I just started making these just random drum patterns. Like, oh, I'm just gonna slice a bunch of drum stuff together and just improvise the songs. So a lot of that material was done just completely on the fly. Like, what's next? Like, it was just pouring out. Complete opposite of the earlier host word stuff in terms of how I put to the songwriting. But for my whole life, I always wanted to hear more albums in the style of In the Nightshade Eclipse, and I've never heard anyone really nail the atmosphere of that album in terms of the sound, in terms of the riffing. Every band that's tried to imitate Emperor to some degree, they all miss the basics of what made that first album and even parts of the second so great. It's those tritones. It's that atonal scale. It's just these messy tritone riffs, these tritone chords, or picking the chords note by note, going up incrementally up or down frets. That's a style that's so lost on other bands that try to emulate Emperor or the symphonic sound. And the beauty of In the Nightshade Eclipse was you had these really messy atonal, like ugly tritone sounds, but then you had these really beautiful keyboards on top of it, these really elegant, majestic, strings and choirs that were in the a lot of them were in that gypsy scale that it's almost a minor harmonic scale, but you have not only the fifth but the flat of fifth, and the interplay between the keyboards and those and guitars. I've never really heard that done anywhere, and I really wanted to try and incorporate that into an album. And I think that's a lot of the core of the sound on that third Host of Lord album. But yeah, I really wanted to just nail that sound, but not completely replicate the style. And I was just the creative juices were flowing. I was on a much higher dose of Adderall at the time, and I was drinking espresso, and it was just pouring out. I had an espresso before this conversation, by the way, which is why it keeps going into such strange directions. I'm real juiced up on caffeine and ready to rock. But yeah, so I mean, that was the concept of that, and I really wanted to explore this this Christian cosmology that I think is really overlooked, even within Christian churches and by scholars. Like, there's all kinds of these exciting writings about God as this, collapsing the ancient orbits, like just the visual imagery of that, like, oh, he appeared and the ancient orbits collapsed, and the mountains were leveled. And I mean, I really wanted to do like almost a cosmic black metal album that was also Christian. There's definitely I guess I was definitely influenced to some degree by some of those space black metal bands like Dark Space. I always wanted to do something kind of like spacey sounding, which is why there's such a strange reverb and delay on the keyboards and really on the whole mix of that album. So yeah, that was the intent behind that, to take the raw Host of Lords sound and do something almost like something a little more just loose and improvised, and something a little more dissonant and more like chaotic and more cosmic sounding.
Yeah, obviously, when you have such a raw and primordial aesthetic as you have with Hosts of Lord, you've taken great care in making sure that each album is very different. Whether it's the themes, the style, or where your imagination comes from, which is what a lot of bands fail to miss. I've seen a lot of bands where they have very raw recording, but it's like 15 demos of the same thing, which is very, very tiring after a while.
I agree. I'm all in favor of doing something different every time. I've tried to do that with Dawnbreaker. I've tried to do that with Hosts of Lord. I've tried to do that with Abazagorath. I even tried to differentiate the two recordings I've done with them. Look, I could easily just churn out albums. I could do over a dozen albums a year if I wanted to, if I just wanted to do random raw riffs all the time and just spit that out. But it would just be so degrading, feel so degrading to me, like it would feel like I was just, like, what's the point of doing that? I really want to, if I run out of like themes and ideas where every album could be different themes and different ideas and different aesthetics and different, just a different feel overall, it's time to hang it up, I think. But yeah, I'm gonna work really hard to give every album a different feel, and every album, everything I do for whatever time I've got left doing this kind of stuff, trying to make each one. And Hosts of Lord, the whole presentation of it is that it's raw black metal, But what can I, within that parameter, what can I do with a raw black metal? What can I do with lo-fi recordings? What can I do to make them creative but still be raw and still appealing to that audience that doesn't want to hear clean production ever? And I respect that, and I respect people that have those convictions. That's one of the reasons why I felt it necessary to do a second band, where I'm still just doing everything. Is that, like, I have friends that they don't want to hear anything that's got clean production. They don't want to hear anything that's technical. They don't want to hear anything that's got too much melody or too much whatever. And I respect that. And I think I was thinking, if I'm working within those parameters, without being like stupidly ignorant with them, in the, where I think where metal goes wrong. How much ground can I cover with that raw style? And I think I have a good, probably 5 or 6 total albums that in me for Host of Word, and I think there's a lot of variety I can cover in that frame and within those parameters. So I'm excited to see what kind of work that we can do going forward.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about what we have coming up soon with you. So in a few months will be it's already been recorded, but you have a New York style death metal, which is I think the first one ever in your career, considering that you've lived in that area forever, right?
We'll see if I'm still a New Yorker when it comes out though. I might be it might be a different story originally, but yeah, I've been dying for many years now to make one last stand in death metal. And I always wonder what it would be like to revisit, because as I said before, my first metal bands were death metal bands, and that's where I began. And for a good 10 or so years now, I always thought, what would it be like having all this experience in black metal for a long time? Just what kind of sound would I get if I were to go and revisit the death metal style just one more time? And in 2016, early 2016, I was on what we call here a staycation, where I had a number of vacation days that I decided to just burn, just to get a break from the pace of the work life out here. I didn't really have the money at the time to go on and go traveling anywhere. So I took this vacation. I had a number of days off where I was just hanging out. And on one of the days, I just caught this like really great inspiration to just start playing death metal. And fortunately, unlike all the other times this happened over the last 20 years, I actually recorded all the stuff that I was writing. So I had this core, all these different ideas of 2 or 3 riffs, in death metal, and spent a real lot of time reorganizing them the next several years. When the pandemic came to New York City and we got stuck with these awful lockdowns, of which I'm still stuck, still not able to eat. I think maybe tonight's first night in months I'll be able to go out to dinner. I had all this time on my hands. I thankfully, thank God, I was employed this whole time, but there wasn't a lot of work to do, maybe a couple hours each day. So I had a lot of time. It's like, maybe now's the time to really get down and get that last death metal album done, because if I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. So I recorded what was going to just be a demo at first, but thankfully you persuaded me to push even further and make the production better and make a whole album instead of just a stupid demo, which would have been a really dumb idea. And so thank you, Nick, for suggesting that and for pushing me in that direction, because I think I needed that. But yeah, I sat down and all right, I don't listen to death metal that much. In fact, I haven't really had any death metal albums in my. I really just don't listen to it anymore. For many years now, maybe over 10 years now. But I still remember all the technique. I remember all the stuff. Let me see if I could pull everything I know about death metal into one album. Again, this is a similar concept to how I did the Abazagorath album, where I tried to hit every black metal niche. Let me pull all the death metal styles I know into one album and see what I can get out of it. So some parts will be, very, very Scandinavian. Maybe something sounding like Demigod, or other parts will be more New York sounding. Maybe almost slam, something along the lines of Eternal Bleeding. Then there's the Florida scene, which I was incredibly infatuated with, and the band Death, who have always been and will always be one of my favorite bands. who I'd probably call my favorite secular band at this point. I really tried to do everything I could think of on this album. I think there's some slower, almost doom death parts. Nothing funeral doom, unfortunately, but there's other parts that are, somewhat technical. Like not too technical to the point where there's no feeling. I wanted to do classic death metal kind of, but I don't want to be one of those brain dead old school death metal quote unquote losers that we're seeing all over the place now, where it's just like a hodgepodge of riffs and gimmicks from old times past. I wanted to sorry.
No, I was just gonna say it's entombed with more D beats and pig squeals. And
Yeah.
that lazy reverb on the vocals.
Or let's just steal all the flavor of the week gimmicks that we saw in the past and pull that into one. Let's take Hypocrisy's alien gimmick and then take Niall's like Egyptian guitar gimmick and let's pull that into one just super gimmick compilation. I'm guessing you can guess the album that I'm referring to there. I will leave that open ended as to
yeah, I got that. Aliens.
I think we've heard something like that in the recent history. Anyways, I'm not doing this album now just because death metal isn't a trend. I've wanted to do this for a long time. And there happened to be a pandemic, and I happened to have not much to do, and a lot of espresso to put to some use. So I really hope that this is going to be true to the everything that's great about death metal. I tried to make the riffs as varied as possible. There's some riffs where I'm tapping with my pick, on a minor third, or other riffs where it's just like atonal arrogance, like it's all over the place. I try to combine the Florida scene, the New York scene, then there's the North, Finnish style. I tried to hit everything I could and do a true classic death metal album.
All right, so yeah, we'll have much more news on that later. We're also talking about doing a compilation album with the first two hosts of Lord Record much later this year.
Yeah, we'll finally get that first album on CD.
It's a great album, but you release so many so quickly. We need to give people time to digest it.
Absolutely, and I need to slow down definitely on these releases before people get bored.
You might end up becoming like, what's his name? Zach Baral Tharag or Thak? I can't remember. The guy who has like 2,000 releases on Metal Archives or something insane.
Really?
Yeah.
I think the record is that dude Buckethead has been releasing like 30 albums a day, like somehow. Or some weird crap like that where he's done like 2,000 just in the last 2 months. I guess when like you're just a guitar player and just doing improv, and prog scales, you could probably get away with that. But no, I think I'll pass. I've never heard of that. That's absolutely ridiculous. To be honest with you, I feel like I'm closer to the end now than I ever was. I feel like there might only be a few years left in releasing albums for me, because I don't want to hang around too long. I'm 34 now, which isn't super old, but I've been doing releases since I was 18, at least one a year. And I don't want to be one of those bands that just hangs around for way too long, or one of those artists that hangs around way too long and no younger band can get any exposure or recognition because they just won't leave, they just won't go away. So I think the day to hang up my hat and ride in the sunset is coming sooner than people may realize for me. I don't want to keep doing this just because I can. I don't want to keep doing this just because people are releasing it. I hope to do a few more quality albums, but I won't be that guy that's, hogging up the top of every festival, for 30 years now. And I get it with some bands. That's your only source of income. That's the only source of income you'll ever have is touring and releasing records. So I mean, no disrespect if for them it is their only means of living and having a decent way of life. But I'd rather ride off to the sunset in my prime and my peak before spiraling out into a bunch of stuff that people just can't really resonate with anymore and relate to anymore. So yeah, I don't think we'll see that many from my personal discography.
All right, I think that wraps us. Let's get some of your really best stuff to ever come out in the next couple of months/year. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Cullen, and there'll be much more news related to Cullen's music in the next couple of months.
Thank you very much for having me. I absolutely love this podcast. Anybody that's listening now, please give a round of applause for Nick and all his patience and all of my ADD tangents and all of my espresso driven having so many different thoughts and ideas open at the same time and just taking such innocent simple questions into such random and meaningless places.
Don't worry about it.
You've got the true Joe Rogan spirit. I love that you're able to just sit and it's been like this for all the guests you've had so far. I love how you're just able to sit and just listen and just let them say what they have to say, let them go where they have to go. I think that's the mark of a great host. So I look forward to these future episodes of this podcast.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much, Cullen.
Great.
Cheers.
Cheers.